My name is Eliza Sutton, and for as long as I can remember, I've found solace in the places where nature and human design meet. I grew up in Willow Creek, a small town nestled in the green folds of Oregon, a place of quiet streets and towering Douglas firs that seemed to whisper secrets to the sky. This love for structured wilderness led me to Portland, to the University of Oregon's esteemed landscape architecture program. For me, it wasn't just a degree, it was a calling. It was the art of crafting spaces that breathe, that invite connection, that heal. My life in Portland was a carefully constructed mosaic of intention and necessity. I lived in a tiny studio apartment in the Hawthorne district, where the scent of rain, roasting coffee, and damp earth was a constant companion. The rent was a monthly mountain I scaled by working as a barista at a cozy corner cafe, the daily grind, and by taking on freelance drafting work whenever I could. It was a life lived on the narrow edge of a budget, a life where luxuries like cloud storage or a backup computer were distant dreams. But it was my life, built with my own hands, and I was fiercely proud of it. The culmination of this life, the keystone of my academic arch, was my capstone project. It wasn't just a thesis, it was a piece of my soul. My project was a proposal to revitalize the neglected riverfront park in my hometown of Willow Creek, a place of childhood memories, now overgrown and forgotten. For months, I poured everything I had into it. The work lived on my silver laptop, a machine that hummed with the ghosts of sleepless nights, the echoes of countless research papers, and the digital blueprints of a dream I was just 1 week away from making real. That laptop wasn't just a tool, it was the vessel carrying my future. The day it happened began like any other Tuesday. Rain pattered a soft, familiar rhythm against my windowpane. I was lost in my work, tweaking the final renderings of a native plant garden, when my brother, Leo, burst into the room. He didn't knock. He never did. Leo was my opposite in almost every way. Where I was quiet and deliberate, he was a whirlwind of charming chaos. He had a magnetic personality that drew people in and a recklessness that often left a trail of minor disasters in his wake, disasters that, more often than not, I was expected to help clean up. "Eliza, I need a ride," he announced, jingling his keys impatiently. "Some friends are having a get-together out near Sauvie Island." I didn't look up from my screen. The glow of the display felt like a protective shield. "I can't, Leo. You know I'm on a deadline. The project is due next Monday." A familiar scoff cut through the quiet hum of my apartment. "Right. The project." He leaned against the doorframe, his arms crossed. "Always the project. You know, you act like you're the only person in the world with important things to do. Some of us have lives." The words were meant to sting, and they did, but I'd grown calluses over the years. "It's not about being important," I said, my voice even. "It's about finishing what I started. You can take the bus." His face darkened. It was a look I knew well, the quick flash of anger when his charm failed to get him what he wanted. "You think you're so much better than us, don't you? Hiding away in your little Portland apartment with your big university degree." He muttered the words, but they were loud enough to fill the small room. I chose silence. I'd learned long ago that arguing with Leo was like trying to reason with a storm. It was better to just let it pass. That was my mistake. Assuming it would pass. He glared at me for a moment longer, then turned and stomped out of the apartment, slamming the front door so hard that a framed print on my wall tilted sideways. I let out a slow breath and turned back to my work, trying to recapture my focus. A few minutes later, I heard a sickening crash from the living room. It wasn't just loud, it was violent. A sound of splintering plastic and shattering glass. My heart leaped into my throat. I rushed out of my small work nook. There, on the polished hardwood floor, lay my laptop. It was in pieces. The screen was a spider web of cracks radiating from a central impact point. The keyboard had been torn from its hinges, and the sleek silver body was bent into a grotesque, unnatural angle. And standing over it, with that same look of petulant defiance on his face, was Leo. "Oops," he said, his voice dripping with a smugness that turned my blood to ice. It slipped. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The air in the room felt thick and heavy, unbreathable. I slowly sank to my knees, my gaze fixed on the wreckage. It wasn't just a machine. It was months of my life. It was the Willow Creek riverfront, the carefully chosen native plants, the community gardens, the AD-accessible pathways. It was every late night, every skipped meal, every ounce of hope I'd poured into my future. All of it gone. Tears I didn't know I was holding back began to stream down my face. I fumbled for my phone, my hands shaking so badly I could barely dial. I called my parents. I needed them. I needed to hear their voices, to be told that this was a nightmare, that it would be okay. My mother answered. I explained what happened through choked sobs, the words tumbling out in a torrent of disbelief and pain. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, a sound that wasn't sympathy. It was a light, airy chuckle. "Oh, Eliza, honey," she said, her voice laced with a weary fondness that was somehow worse than anger. "You're being so dramatic. It's just a computer. You're the practical one. You'll figure something out." I couldn't form a reply. My father came on the line. "Your mother's right," he said, his tone one of mild amusement. "You kids and your digital lives. In my day, we had everything on paper. Maybe this is a good lesson." A lesson? I felt a profound, hollowing cold spread through me. They weren't listening. They didn't hear the sound of my future shattering. They only heard their daughter, the practical one, having another manageable crisis. "And what about Leo?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "He said it was an accident," my mother chimed in again. "He feels terrible, I'm sure." "Don't be so hard on him, Eliza. He's just being Leo. He's just being Leo." The family motto. The phrase that had excused a lifetime of carelessness. My brother, who was still standing there, shrugged. "See? It slipped. Maybe next time you'll learn to share the car." I ended the call. I didn't scream. I didn't throw something. The rage I expected to feel was absent, replaced by a strange, terrifying calm. It was the calm of a deep ocean after a shipwreck, a silence that held the weight of everything that had been lost. I sat there on the floor, next to the ruins of my work, and looked at the fragments of my reflection in the broken screen. In that moment, something inside me shifted. A boundary once soft and permeable began to harden into stone. This wasn't just about a laptop. It was about being seen. It was about being valued. And I realized, with a clarity that was both painful and liberating, that if I wanted to be seen, I would have to be the one to open my own eyes. This wouldn't be the end. It would be the beginning of learning how to rebuild, not just a project, but myself. The days that followed were a blur of quiet desperation. The initial shock gave way to a steely resolve. I didn't have time for grief. I had a deadline. I took the small, emergency fund I'd saved, a meager $300 meant for a car repair, and used it to survive. I sold my grandfather's old acoustic guitar, a beautiful Martin that I'd treasured since I was 16. The pawn shop owner gave me $400 for it, his eyes sympathetic. Each dollar felt like a small, heavy stone in my pocket. I met with my advisor, Dr. Anya Sharma, a brilliant woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. I explained the situation, expecting a lecture on backups, but instead, she just listened. "The university archives have high-powered workstations, Eliza," she said softly after I finished. "They are open 24 hours for graduate students this time of year. I will grant you a 1-week extension. That's all I can do. The rest is up to you." She paused, then added, "I know you can do it." Her belief in me was a lifeline. I lived in the university library for the next 2 weeks. My world shrank to the hum of the computer tower, the scent of old books and dust, and the glow of a monitor in the dead of night. I worked my shifts at the daily grind in a caffeine-fueled days, then went straight to the library, surviving on stale pastries and sheer willpower. I pieced together my project from memory, from scribbled notes on napkins, and from fragmented drafts I'd emailed to myself weeks before. It was like rebuilding a cathedral from a handful of stones. During this period of intense focus, I cut off contact with my family. It wasn't an act of petulance, it was an act of self-preservation. I needed every ounce of my energy. I couldn't afford the emotional cost of their dismissal, of hearing them praise Leo for getting AC on a midterm while my world was being painstakingly reconstructed in silence. It was during one of these late nights, sorting through my emails for any scrap of my old work, that I stumbled upon something else. It was a forwarded confirmation from a company called Swift Fund Solutions. I didn't recognize the name. Curious, I opened it. It was an approval for an $8,000 high-interest student loan, and it was in my name. My blood ran cold. I scrolled down, my heart pounding against my ribs. The application had used my social security number, my address, my date of birth. The digital signature at the bottom was a clumsy forgery of my own. I knew, with a certainty that left no room for doubt, who had done this. Leo. The loan had been approved 3 months ago, and the payments were already past due, accumulating interest at an alarming rate. A few days later, another piece of the puzzle fell into place. While searching for articles on urban revitalization for a revised literature review, I came across a piece in an online edition of the Portland Monthly. The article, titled Green Spaces, Greener Cities, was about small-scale community gardening projects. It was well-written, insightful, and the author was listed as Leo Sutton. I stared at the byline. Leo had never shown an ounce of interest in urban planning. I copied a distinctive paragraph and pasted it into a search engine. The results came up instantly. The paragraph, and indeed the entire article, had been lifted verbatim from an obscure landscape architecture blog written by a graduate student in British Columbia a year earlier. I leaned back in the hard library chair, the evidence glowing on the screen in front of me. This wasn't just about a broken laptop anymore. It wasn't about a temper tantrum. This was a pattern of deceit that was now threatening my name and my financial future. The quiet resolve I'd been nurturing hardened into a decision. It wasn't a decision born of revenge. It was a decision born of necessity. I had to protect myself. I couldn't afford to be the family shock absorber any longer. The day I submitted my capstone project felt surreal. I walked out of the department office into the misty Portland morning, feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The weight of the deadline was gone, but it was replaced by another. I had rebuilt my work. Now I had to rebuild my boundaries. I went home and scheduled a meeting with the university's student conduct office. I also contacted the legal aid clinic on campus for advice about the fraudulent loan. I didn't tell my parents what was happening. I knew their first instinct would be to smooth things over, to protect Leo, to ask me to let it go for the sake of the family. But I was beginning to understand that true family doesn't ask you to set yourself on fire to keep them warm. The fallout was quiet but swift. The university launched an academic integrity investigation into the plagiarism. The editor of the Portland Monthly was mortified and printed a public retraction. The legal aid lawyer helped me file a fraud report with Swift Fund Solutions and the credit bureaus. It was a slow, bureaucratic process, but it was a start. My parents, of course, eventually found out. It was my mother who called, her voice tight with a mixture of panic and accusation. "Eliza, what have you done?" she cried. "The university called Leo. They're talking about academic probation. And this loan company, you're ruining his future." I took a deep breath, picturing the quiet strength of the towering firs back home. "Mom," I said, my voice calm and steady in a way that surprised even me. "Leo plagiarized an article under his name. He took out an $8,000 loan under my name. These are the consequences of his actions, not mine." "But we're a family," she insisted. "You're supposed to help him, not hurt him. Why didn't you come to us? We could have handled this privately." The question hung in the air between us, heavy with unspoken history. "Because I did come to you," I replied softly. I came to you when he destroyed my thesis, and you told me I was being dramatic. You laughed. I learned that day that handling it privately meant me absorbing the damage while everyone else looked away. I can't do that anymore. It's not healthy for me, and it's not helping him. There was a long silence. I could hear my father in the background, his voice a low murmur. Finally, my mother spoke again, her voice smaller now. So what happens now? Now, I said, Leo has to take responsibility. And I have to take care of myself. That conversation marked a turning point. It was the first time I had ever defined my needs as separate from my family's expectations. It was terrifying, and it was liberating. The path forward was uncertain. The distance between us felt vast and uncharted, but for the first time, the ground beneath my own 2 feet felt solid. Life began to move forward in unexpected ways. A few weeks after graduation, I received an email from Dr. Sharma. My capstone project, the one I had rebuilt from ash and memory, had been nominated for a National Student Design Award. Better yet, it had caught the attention of a Seattle-based nonprofit called the Hearthwood Foundation, an organization renowned for its work in sustainable community development. They offered me a year-long paid fellowship. I accepted without hesitation. Moving to Seattle felt like stepping into a new chapter. I found a small apartment in Fremont, with a view of the canal. The city was different from Portland, busier, brighter, with the salty tang of the Sound in the air. My work with Hearthwood was everything I had ever dreamed of. I was part of a team of passionate, brilliant people who valued my ideas. They saw me. I maintained a quiet, low-contact relationship with my family. The legal issues with the loan were eventually resolved. With the evidence I provided, the debt was removed from my name and transferred to Leo, who was forced by my parents to start a payment plan. He also received a year of academic probation from the university. We didn't speak of it. Our phone calls were brief and polite, skirting the edges of the chasm that had opened between us. I didn't know if it could ever be bridged, but I knew I couldn't be the one to build the bridge alone. I poured my energy into my work. I thrived. At Hearthwood, I learned not just about landscape design, but about project management, community outreach, and the quiet, persistent work of making positive change. I was happy. It was a calm, steady happiness that felt earned. About 10 months into my fellowship, my director called me into her office. "Eliza," she said, smiling. "We've just finalized the acquisition of our next major restoration project, and I want you to be the project lead." She spread a large map across her desk. It's an old property in Oregon, fallen into disuse. A historic farmhouse and an apple orchard. It's called Blackwood Orchard. My breath caught in my chest. Blackwood Orchard. It was just a few miles outside of Willow Creek. I knew it well. As children, my family had gone there every autumn to pick apples. I remembered the scent of ripe fruit and damp leaves, the taste of the warm cider they sold at the farm stand. I remembered my father lifting me onto his shoulders to reach the highest branches, and Leo, even then, shaking the trees to make the apples rain down, laughing at the chaos. It was a place woven into the fabric of my earliest, happiest memories. "It's a beautiful spot," my director continued, unaware of the flood of memories she had unleashed. "But it needs a lot of work. We envision a community hub, a teaching farm, retreat space, and a restored natural habitat. It's a perfect fit for the work you did on your capstone project." To lead the restoration of Blackwood Orchard felt like coming full circle. It was a chance to bring the principles I'd fought so hard to articulate in my project to life, in a place that held deep personal meaning. It was a gift. The work was all-consuming and deeply rewarding. I spent months traveling between Seattle and Willow Creek, overseeing everything from architectural plans for the farmhouse to soil testing in the orchard. I walked the land, feeling a connection to it that was both professional and profoundly personal. I was healing a piece of land that was tied to my own history, creating a space for others to find peace and connection. One crisp autumn afternoon, a year after I had started the project, I was on site, reviewing plans with the construction foreman. The old farmhouse was starting to look beautiful again, with a new coat of white paint and gleaming windows. The orchard, once overgrown, was now neatly pruned, ready for a new season of growth. I saw a familiar car pull up the long, gravel driveway. My parents' Subaru. My heart gave a small, nervous flutter. I hadn't seen them in person in almost a year. They got out of the car and stood there for a moment, looking around at the transformed property with an air of uncertainty. They looked older, more tired than I remembered. They hadn't come to see me. The local Willow Creek newspaper had run a feature story about the Hearthwood Foundation's project at the orchard, and I knew they, like many locals, were likely curious. I took a deep breath and walked over to them. My work boots crunched on the gravel. I was wearing jeans, a flannel shirt, and a dusty hard hat, the uniform of my new life. My mother saw me first. Her eyes widened, a flicker of recognition followed by confusion. Eliza? Hi, Mom. Hi, Dad. My father stared, his gaze sweeping from me to the restored farmhouse and back again. We didn't know you were involved with this, he said, his voice quiet. I'm the project lead, I said simply. An awkward silence fell between us. The air was filled with the things we weren't saying. I could see the questions in their eyes, the regret, the confusion. Finally, my mother spoke, her voice trembling slightly. It's beautiful, what you're doing here. It looks hopeful. Thank you, I said. That's the idea. My father cleared his throat. We saw Leo last week, he began, his eyes fixed on a distant tree. He's working at the hardware store. He's paying back that loan. Slowly, he looked at me then, and for the first time, I didn't see dismissal in his eyes. I saw a deep, weary sadness. We didn't handle things right, Eliza. We see that now. My mother reached out, as if to touch my arm, but then let her hand fall back to her side. We were so used to you being the strong one, she whispered. We forgot that even the strong ones need to be protected. We're so sorry. Tears welled in my eyes, hot and unexpected. It wasn't the grand, cinematic apology I might have once dreamed of. It was quiet and humbled and real. It was a start. I didn't have a neat, tidy answer for them. The hurt hadn't vanished, but the anger had long since faded, replaced by a quiet understanding. I had found my own strength, not in opposition to them, but within myself. I had built a life and a future that they hadn't been able to see for me, and in doing so, I had finally allowed them to see me. I know, I said softly. I looked past them, toward the orchard, where the afternoon sun was filtering through the branches, casting long, peaceful shadows on the ground. The foundation is hosting a community open house next month when the first phase is complete. You should come. It wasn't a promise of forgiveness, not yet. But it was an invitation. It was a gate left unlocked. It was a recognition that some things, like an old orchard, can be neglected for years, but with care and intention, they can be brought back to life, ready to bear fruit once more. As I watched them get back into their car, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. My journey hadn't been about revenge or winning. It had been about finding my own voice, tending to my own garden, and learning that the strongest boundaries are built not out of anger, but out of love for the person you are becoming. And as I turned back to my work, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was home.